Welcome to BioVit Live. This is our first webinar of our new series aimed at providing education and facilitating some really interesting discussions in the field of nutrition and sustainability. So before we dive into the webinar, I thought I would tell you a little bit about BioVit. So BioVit have developed clinically tested solutions for natural food fortification. So BioVit makes 100% organic vitamins and minerals derived from plants and fungi, and they supply food companies with these. BioVit are also working with several experts, as shown on the slide, including universities like Aberystwyth and Swansea, as well as RSSL on various different research projects. And we've also got funding from Innovate UK. A bit about me. So I'm Eiméar. I'm a registered associate nutritionist with a master's in clinical nutrition and public health, and a huge passion for credible nutrition communications. And I'm the head of nutrition at BioVit. I previously worked in the food industry in product development and also in HCP communications and sales. But for more of my career, I worked in a digital health company on the research and development of nutrition education and behaviour change programs. I joined BioVit in April this year, and I'm really excited at where BioVit is going and having the chance to host these webinars to educate and empower members of the food industry, nutritionists, dietitians, and any individual interested in these topics, and provide you with credible nutrition information. So today's webinar is titled, Are Vitamins Natural? And it's really going to be an introduction to why BioVit really came about, and some of the science and the evidence behind this question. So the learning objectives are to discover the key differences between natural and synthetic micronutrients, looking at the arguments for using the different types in food fortification and in supplementation. And we'll also look at what research has been done and is being done on the topic. It should be about 25 minutes with a 5-minute Q&A at the end. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to type in your question, and then I'll see what we can answer at the end. If we run out of time and I can't get through all of the questions, we can definitely pick up some conversations afterwards, so don't worry. So to kick us off, we're going to do a poll. This is just to get a bit of an understanding of the level of awareness in the audience on synthetic and natural micronutrients. So on a scale of 1 to 3, how much do you know about synthetic and natural vitamins and minerals? With 1 being I had no idea synthetic vitamins existed, and 3 being I know about synthetic vitamins and I'm interested in the subject. So I'll just launch the poll now, and you should see it on your screens now. And I will just leave a couple of seconds for you to answer the poll. Interesting, it's looking interesting. Okay. Okay, it looks like we've nearly got everyone, just a few more answers to come in. Okay, really interesting. So we've had 0% choose number 1, which doesn't hugely surprise me, seeing as you've joined this webinar today. And then we've got about 44% for number 2 and 56% for number 3. Okay, brilliant. So I'm talking to an audience who knows a bit about this and is hopefully keen to know more. So let's get into it. So this is just the basics. I know that most people watching this webinar will know this already, but I wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page. So we can break the nutrients that humans require into 2 key groups, macro and micronutrients. Today we're focused on micronutrients, which are needed in much smaller amounts compared to macro, but are still absolutely essential for our health. And micronutrients include vitamins and minerals. You'll also all know or have heard of food fortification, but I thought I'd clarify what the actual definition is. So the WHO define it as the practice of deliberately increasing the content of an essential micronutrient in a food to improve the nutritional quality of the food supply and to provide a public health benefit with minimal risk to health. So this first emerged in the 1920s in the US in an attempt to address malnutrition. So they were seeing specific micronutrient deficiencies in the population, and so they used targeted fortification strategies to try and address this across the board. So started with iodine and salt, then they started adding vitamin D to milk, and then iron and B vitamins in flour and bread. And the UK followed with mandatory flour fortification in 1980. And this is still live today. And at the moment, this mandatory flour fortification includes calcium, iron, vitamin B1 and B3. And this year, it's also been decided that folic acid will be added to that legislation. So originally, fortification seems to have been done to increase the nutrition of staple food products in an attempt to address widespread malnutrition. Nowadays, it's not just done for this reason. So why do food companies fortify their food products now? There's a list of these on the right-hand side of the slide. So the first one is to increase nutrient density, as they suggested already, fortified flour. But nowadays, food companies aren't just adding nutrients to those staple food products, they're adding them to all sorts of food products to increase the nutrition, from breakfast cereals to ultra-processed complete nutrition bars and shakes. So it's much more widespread, the types of products that are now having nutrients added to them. Another reason is to achieve health claims. In the UK, EU, you have to have 15% of the reference intake, which is the amount of a micronutrient needed in the day, in one portion of a product to be able to use a health claim associated with that micronutrient. So for example, for iron, one of the health claims is helps to maintain normal cognitive function. So that's an approved health claim. And in order to get that on pack, you'll need to have 15% of the RI of iron in one portion of the product. So food manufacturers will be adding iron and other nutrients into their products to achieve that 15% and therefore use health claims on pack. Another reason to add to fortify food products is to replace the nutrients lost in food processing. So vitamins and minerals are quite susceptible to heat treatment, and so they will degrade from heat, particularly vitamins. And so we can replace these nutrients after the food processing has taken place with food fortification. We might also do this to match the nutritional profile of an alternative product. So, for example, plant-based milk is designed to replicate the nutritional benefits of dairy milk. So it's fortified with micronutrients that will help to bring it up to the dairy milk nutritional level. And then also, food companies might fortify their food products to support groups with specific dietary needs. So for example, vegan products will often have extra vitamin B12 added to them. So on this slide are some examples of different types of products that are fortified. So we've got a range of different plant-based milks, then we've got a meal replacement, and then some breakfast cereal. And you can see in pink, I've highlighted the vitamins and minerals that have been added to this, to these different products. What you might not know is that the micronutrients that have been added to those products are all made synthetically. But what does that really mean? So these vitamins and minerals are made in various ways. Some are synthesized chemically in a laboratory using materials like petrochemicals, coal tar, or even animal sources. Some will be produced biochemically using fermentation in bacteria or yeast. And you can see the diagram on the slide, which is showing the steps involved in making ascorbic acid, which is the synthetic version of vitamin C. And this just highlights the complexity of these processes involved in making the synthetic vitamins. It's important to make it clear here that just because we're saying that things are made chemically or synthetically doesn't mean they're inherently bad or unhealthy. Vitamins are chemical structures. That's completely normal. That is how they are found. Also, most of the health products that we rely on in medicine are made synthetically. But these sorts of products can't be found naturally, so they have to be made that way. Whereas vitamins and minerals are naturally found on Earth. So why are we making them synthetically? Well, they're cheap to make and sell in large quantities. It's easy to manage the consistency of these products. So you can be sure that X amount of product will have X amount of vitamin or mineral, and this will be maintained throughout the whole batch. And as they're made synthetically, they're less susceptible to damage from food processing, which is very appealing to manufacturers who are looking to achieve health claims and things like that. And you can see a really interesting statistic on the slide that just highlights the scale of synthetic vitamins and minerals. So the global synthetic vitamin and mineral supplement market is currently in 2024 worth £45 billion, projected to reach £105 billion in 2032. So the market is huge. But there are some things that we might want to consider and discuss in relation to using synthetic micronutrients. And the first of these is the environmental impact of using petrochemicals and fossil fuels as the starting materials, because these have significant environmental impacts, including air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions. And considering the size of the market, as I just mentioned, we do need an alternative that has less of a significant environmental impact. Evidence doesn't really support the use of synthetics for disease or mortality prevention. I've got a list of studies on the right-hand side. The top one is a study on 400,000 people published this year, which saw no benefit of taking multivitamin tablets daily. So this was an observational study, which means that it does have its limitations. There are confounding factors. For example, there will be variations in people's dietary recall and the accuracy of their food diaries. We also need to consider compliance. Did they really take the multivitamin every day? And there might also have been a variety of different multivitamin supplements that people were taking. But it is a super big study, 400,000 people. So it's very interesting to see no benefit. And another study, the second one on that list, was a large systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials. So this is really interesting because this is the highest quality evidence possible. And this found no evidence to support the use of supplements to reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases. So the use of synthetic multivitamin supplements were not associated with the risk of cardiovascular disease. Another point is that synthetic vitamin supplements have also been linked to adverse effects when they're consumed in high doses. So these studies are using very, very high doses of these multivitamin supplements, but they did see increased incidence of disease. It's important to note that they are, again, observational studies, so there will be a lot of confounding factors that might have influenced the disease risk as well. So what all of this highlights is how difficult it is to do high quality nutrition intervention studies. There are so many variables in people's diet and lifestyle. There are so many issues with compliance. And then there's a huge difference between what we do in real life and is assessed in an observational study compared to when we're being assessed in a lab in a clinical trial. So for me, what these studies really do is that they raise questions about the efficacy of these synthetic micronutrients. And at this point, I just thought it might be helpful to highlight some of the different types of these micronutrients that you might see added to foods or in the supplement market, as it can be a little bit unclear or misleading. So we've got the synthetic ones, which we've talked through. Then there's food grown or cultured. So this is becoming increasingly popular in the nutritional supplements world because it gives the impression of being natural and exclusively sourced from food, but it's not really the case. For food grown or cultured micronutrients, synthetic nutrients are actually combined with the natural plants and fungi and algae. So There are some natural elements in there, but ultimately the synthetic nutrient is added to that. So it's not entirely natural as it is claiming to be. And then there's also nature identical. So these are synthetically made, but they are chemically identical to natural micronutrients. So this is slightly different from the completely synthetic ones, which are often not the same chemical structure or have slight differentiations in chemical structure to the natural vitamins and minerals. Nature identical are synthetically made still, but they are chemically the same as natural micronutrients. And then nutritional yeast is just an interesting thing to highlight because we all know nutritional yeast is the source of B12 for vegans, but the B12 in nutritional yeast isn't as natural as it kind of is advertised to be. So synthetic B12 is added to the yeast product to make nutritional yeast, and you can see that in the ingredients list on the left. So you've got the yeast, and then you've got a bunch of B vitamins that have been added, including B12. What's really interesting is that the organic nutritional yeast doesn't include these synthetic vitamins in the ingredients list, but they still have the same level of B12 and other B vitamins in the nutrition table. Organic products can't have synthetic ingredients, so it kind of leaves us to question, how are they achieving the same B12 levels without this synthetic B12 added into the product? I'll leave that puzzle with you. So now that we've talked a bit more about synthetics, I wanted to highlight the consumer level of awareness. At the start, we did a poll to understand our audience's level of awareness. And everyone was in the sort of 2 and 3 on the level of awareness, and no one was unaware of synthetic vitamins and minerals. But let's look at what consumers said. So in a survey earlier this year of 500 people in the UK, all adults, they were given a bunch of food products, as you can see on the slide, and they were asked whether they would expect each product individually to contain only natural vitamins and minerals. And overall, on average, 77% said yes across the board. So these consumers are not aware of synthetic micronutrients. They do expect that these products only contain natural vitamins and minerals. Obviously, the audience on this webinar, you are obviously more aware due to being in the industry and being generally more educated, but the average consumer isn't aware. So let's take a step back. In nature, vitamins are never isolated. They are always present within a food, and this is what we evolved to eat. So why is that important? Whole foods are more than just a sum of their nutrients. It's the food matrix that's important. The food matrix is the combination of all the chemical and physical components of a food and how they interact with one another, which also influences how our bodies digest and use the food. So on this slide, you can see lots of different elements of the food matrix. You've got the food structure, you've got the macro and micronutrients, but you've also got the non-nutrients, including things like polyphenols, which have been demonstrated in research to have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. So there's a lot more in the food matrix than just the known macro and micronutrients, and these are all really important for our health. But when we make synthetic micronutrients, we isolate them, so we don't have this food matrix. And the food matrix influences bioavailability, which is how much of a substance is absorbed into the blood and available to be used in the body. So this is taking the nutrients from the food to being absorbed into the blood to being utilized by the body cells. And bioavailability depends on several different factors. Some examples include not only the food matrix, but other things that are consumed at the same time. So, for example, if you consumed foods high in vitamin C, like citrus fruit, alongside food high in iron, like beans, the vitamin C will help with the absorption of the iron. It will aid it and make it more bioavailable. And there are several other factors that also influence the bioavailability of different nutrients. But how do we measure bioavailability? The best way is to measure blood or urine levels. So you're measuring the amount of the nutrients in the blood. And this kind of takes us to that third stage of bioavailability on the slide. It's difficult to measure the fourth stage where nutrients are being delivered to cells, other than measuring things like health outcomes or health markers. So what about natural vitamins and minerals then? So these are sourced directly from their natural whole food sources. And essentially that food is concentrated down into an extract, retaining the nutrients from the original food in a more concentrated form. And this means that alongside the targeted micronutrient, it also provides a range of the compounds that were naturally found in that food matrix. So that includes the polyphenols, the cofactors, the enzymes, the bioactives, and these might work synergistically to enhance the absorption of each other. But when it comes to research on the bioavailability of natural micronutrients compared to synthetic ones, research is a bit limited. But it's not surprising given the use of synthetics being the norm in the food and pharmaceutical industry for so long. But there are some small studies that do highlight the potential of natural vitamins and minerals. And I'll briefly mention a few now. So the first study on vitamin E. In the study, participants were given equal amounts of both a natural and synthetic version of vitamin E in a mix together. And these different versions of vitamin E were labeled with a specific technique so that the researchers could measure them in the blood. And two groups of 5 adults basically took the vitamin E and they were in equal ratios, the natural and the synthetic. And they took it daily for about a week. And they measured different time points and different concentrations. Overall, the results showed that the natural vitamin E consistently achieved higher blood concentrations than the synthetic version. So there was more vitamin E coming out in the blood than the synthetic version. And the natural vitamin E had a slower rate of decline. So this suggests better long-term bioavailability. However, this is a very small study with a very small sample size and a very short duration. So there are limitations, but it definitely raises questions and is interesting. Another study with 10 healthy people looking at vitamin C, taking it either as a synthetic supplement or from citrus fruit. And the vitamin C from the citrus fruit increased blood vitamin C levels by 57.5%. compared to the synthetic vitamin C, which only increased it by 35.5%. So again, a very small study and short duration and no control, but it highlights the potential for these natural versions to be more bioavailable. And then some research on folate, which is interesting. So vitamins need to be in their active form to be used in the body effectively. So normally processes will take place when you consume a vitamin. It will be converted into its natural form by the body and then used and metabolized. And that's all completely normal. And this research showed that the natural version of folate is actually closer to the active form than the synthetic version, folic acid. So this would mean that when we can metabolize natural folate more efficiently than synthetic folic acid because it requires less steps and less energy to convert it, which you can see on the diagram. On the other hand, we do know that when dietary folate is consumed from natural dietary sources, its bioavailability can be limited by things like anti-nutrients such as phytates. So it's definitely something that needs further research, but again, a lot of potential here. So this highlights where we're currently at with research, and it's clear that there is a big gap in this area, which is why BIOVIT are working with Swansea University on a series of clinical trials. So the first part is the one that the methodology is on the screen. This is a double-blind randomized control trial looking at the bioavailability of natural nutrients from plant extracts compared to synthetic ones. And this is currently live, and participants are currently being enrolled in this study. I won't go through the whole methodology in tons of detail, but essentially there'll be 40 participants and they will take either a synthetic or a natural blend of micronutrients matched for micronutrient content for 30 days. And then they will measure the micronutrients and metabolites in the blood before and after these 30 days, as well as do cognitive tests to measure cognition and cognitive function. So this is interesting because these cognitive tests will help us not only look at the bioavailability, but also start looking at the impact on health outcomes like cognition. So it takes us further along that bioavailability scale. So we should have some results early next year. And then this is only the first part of a larger clinical trial that will have more people in that we will start next year. So definitely stay tuned. And it's really exciting. It's the first study looking at the cumulative effect over 30 days and directly comparing natural and synthetic micronutrients. I've just popped Jason's contact details on the slide, as the project is currently, or the clinical trial is currently live. So if you wanted to get involved or had any questions about it, you could definitely reach out to him there. Okay, so a summary of the differences between natural and synthetic. So synthetic, obviously there are some considerations that we have talked about: the environmental impact, the fact that large studies show no benefits on disease or mortality prevention, particularly cardiovascular disease, and the fact that these nutrients are isolated and they have no synergistic compounds from the food matrix. The advantages would be they're low cost and they're accessible, and the heat and process stability. With natural nutrients, there are a couple of considerations in terms of their them being volatile to heat and processing, and being more costly because natural nutrients are coming from real food, which takes more time and effort and resources, whereas synthetics are being made from cheap raw materials. And the advantages being they are much more environmentally friendly. They're coming from things like plants and fungi that are naturally found on Earth. They provide a whole nutritional ecosystem full of synergistic compounds that will aid bioavailability, all part of the food matrix. And they might be closer to the active form of the vitamins, which would mean that they would be more efficiently metabolized, but more research is needed. So overall, there's just a big lack of awareness and understanding on this topic, and a lack of research. So this is why we wanted to start this webinar, provide some education and start some really interesting discussions. And here are the references from the slides, and I could definitely share these with you afterwards if you were interested. And now we've got some time for a Q&A. So if you just give me a moment, I will have a look at our Q&A function and what questions we have. Okay, so one of the questions is around food labels. So you showed some food labels on the slides. How can we tell when a nutrient is synthetic compared to when it's natural on the label? It's a good question because it can be really difficult to do so, especially considering that synthetics are just the norm now. I think the key differentiator is if a vitamin or mineral is natural or it's food-based, it will say in the ingredients list where it's coming from. So for example, vitamin A in the list might say derived from amla or amla powder, amla extract. It will say after the vitamin A where it's coming from. And these ingredient names won't sound like something synthetic. They should be things you either recognize, or if you popped it into Google, you'd see that it's a natural plant or fungi. Whereas the synthetic vitamins and minerals will either just say vitamin A with nothing else, or they might have the chemical name in brackets. That can be helpful if you are a scientifically minded person and you know the chemical names for these nutrients and you know whether the chemical name has been altered and therefore it's a synthetic version. But your average consumer wouldn't really know that. So I think the best thing to look out for is just whether the source of the nutrient is made clear, because if a company is going to the lengths to use natural ingredients for their vitamins and minerals, they're definitely going to shout about it on the ingredients list. Okay, hope that answered the question. Let's have a look at some others. Okay, so one of the questions is, are there any scenarios where synthetic micronutrients are a better choice? So we have talked about the advantages of synthetics being they are cheaper, they are more accessible, they are easier to produce consistency at high volumes. So there are definitely cases where it's more appropriate, or it has been appropriate to use these. For example, in the very large population fortification strategies that we discussed, it makes sense that you would opt for these synthetic micronutrients because it's easier to do that at a large mass. And it's been the norm so far, so why wouldn't you choose those? But I think that there's increased awareness in terms of ultra processed foods, in terms of things being natural. Consumers want to know what's in their food. They want more natural and whole food products. And also, malnutrition is still a huge problem. And that's not just overnutrition, but that's undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. A quarter of the population still have a micronutrient deficiency. So this hasn't been solved. And maybe we do need to be going back to the sorts of foods and ingredients that we were meant to eat that are made naturally. So yeah, you can see why synthetics have been used. You can see the advantages there. But perhaps a shift is what we need. Okay, I think that is probably all the questions that we have time for today. But if you have any more, please do feel free to drop me an email afterwards, or yeah, we can have a chat about those. So yeah, I just want to finish off by saying thank you so much for joining the webinar today. I really hope that you enjoyed it, found it useful and relevant. I'd love to hear your feedback, so please do feel free to drop me an email, ema@biovit.com. I will also be sending out a feedback form over the next couple of days, so it'd be really, really great if you could spend 2 minutes just filling that out so that we can make sure that we improve our webinars going forwards. Also, if you could sign up to our newsletter if you haven't done so already, that's where you'll hear about the latest news with BioVit, our research findings and outcomes, and also any upcoming webinars. And speaking of those, we have got our next webinar scheduled in, which is really exciting, on the 8th of October at 12 p.m. And we'll be exploring the complexities of ultra-processed foods, which is a really hot topic and something I'm really, really interested in. I'll be hosting this webinar, and I'll have 3 amazing women guest speakers who are experts in psychology, consumer testing, nutrition science, and there's industry expertise there too. So I'm really excited about this webinar, and I'll be sending out more information on how to sign up to the newsletter subscribers and across LinkedIn, etc. very soon. So yes, keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join the webinar today.